Chapter 46. "Do you see through my eyes this?" Vlade susurrated. "Do you see what glory we shall have?" He smiled at the sky. "There is a storm coming with us." He directed his gaze down to the fragment of the obsidian mirror he had taken great pains to break out intact. "Or coming for us," a voice from the mirror snapped. He glanced at the king's reflection, wondering if it looked as if he were talking to himself. Dis had been the one to show him their fate, and that information had cost him his sword. It should have been here with him, and he would make sure that his king knew what that loss meant. He gazed out over the field. He was high on a rocky outcropping, overlooking his army. The wind was rising and pushing out their magical mist. The mirror continued, "Something bothers me, Vlade." The commander smirked. "Don't worry, Dis. It's different this time. We've never had victory over the elves in battle before. You'll finally get to fulfill your father's pride." Vlade's lips curled into a smirk as he looked out again. Their warriors had rolled onto the field, crushing the flowers beneath their feet. He had spent so long building this force from the fragments of the Kelin after the banishment. Like forging a new, stronger blade from the melted shards of other swords, he had crafted this army better and had instilled it with the memories of how they had failed in the past. He had made a wasteland of their homeworld to do it, but he didn't care. Here was a fruitful world for the taking. Over the ranks of the Kelin, beyond the mingling cultists, he watched the Calvar lashing out against their leashes. He admired the beasts. They could charge the horizon and bite whatever they could, never being frustrated by tactics, timing, or patience. They were pure. They were free. Even without his sword, here he was on the cusp of his victory. Vlade licked his lips. "We will break their castle like a flood." The mirror snorted. "Or break like a wave." The Kelin commander snarled and shoved the obsidian into his pocket. Spike, Jake's massive warhorse, cantered along the battlements. He whinnied as the lightning above him tore at the clouds like a battle itself. The armored figures on the wall stood motionless against the oncoming storm. The wind calmed. Overhead, fractured electric radiance split the sky and thunder chased. Below, the Calvar lunged and lunged, the leather straps holding them stretched too far. Some of the beasts broke free. Their handlers let go of the rest and ran for cover. The Calvar charged the castle, ruined harnesses streaming after them. They threw themselves against the walls and gate, ricocheting off but immediately attacking anew. They smashed at them again, over and over, wetting the castle with their own blood. Their hooves bit into the stone, scattering chips everywhere. The falling pieces came away larger and larger as they mined deeper into the walls and gate. The cultists rushed from behind them, carrying ladders. Up on the wall, the elves pulled their arrows free. The shafts lanced down at the mining Calvar and cultists like steel rain. But they were too few. Ladders banged against the walls, and the enemy began to rise. Below, the Calvar continued to tear, shredding through the flesh of the nearest cultists with total abandon, all while being peppered with arrows from above. Above, Spike whinnied and galloped along the battlements. Once he reached the corner of the wall, he jumped. He soared down through the air but landed as gently as a leaf on the ground below. He whirled and buried his teeth into the shoulder of the nearest cultist before bashing the man against the castle until he stopped squirming. Next, he slammed his hooves into the flesh of a Calvar. Its skin, which had withstood arrows and stone, ripped open to him. He bit down on the back of its neck and squeezed. Bones crunched between his teeth as the animal screamed. Up on the battlements, several cultists slipped off of their ladders, landing between the elvish archers. The first one up raised his sword at Selenian's back just as the elf drew his bow for another shot at the Calvar below. An arrow took the cultist through the throat as the next nearest archer turned and let fly. The man staggered forward, arms flailing, and collapsed onto the stones. Selenian loosed 3 more arrows, and 2 other cultists spilled onto the battlements, dead. The third collapsed on the ladder, his body sagging onto the other climbers. The elf kicked a ladder away from the wall and whirled back to shooting the Calvar at the castle's base. Several of them had clubbed deep holes in the stone already. He reached into the quiver tied to his leg and patted it. Few arrows remained. The Storm Reader's light crept all around him now, and the world seemed filtered through grayness. Selenian felt his body flinch and wondered why. His ears had heard a groan. He let his gaze fall. A cultist he had killed stirred at his feet. He shot another arrow into the cultist's back and spun toward the next invader. The body continued to push itself upright, clawing toward him. He stared, and the cultist raised his face and opened his mouth. The elf gulped when he saw the other's eyes. They were sightless and fixed on a point not visible in this world. The other 2 corpses he had just slain also unfolded themselves from the walkway. A gasp of panic died in his throat. He dropped his bow and yanked at his sword. He swung his blade at the nearest undead warrior's head and found his voice. "The cultists! The Kelin have magicked them!" He felt hands, still warm, grappling at his legs. More living cultists crested the battlements, and blades crossed with deadly music all along the castle. The cultists were no match for the elves' skill, but their numbers never decreased. The few elves on the wall fought brilliantly, but the cultists continued to rise over the walls of the castle. In the back of the field, Vlad motioned the Kelin host forward. There was still a little risk, but he had waited long enough for this night.